Hello and welcome to Logitech G. I'm joined by Matt.
Hello, bodders.
Hello, Matt. The great Matsby himself has been to see Total War again. Total War 3 Kingdoms. Matt, can you tell us what have you learned since your last play?
So this was slightly different to the last playthrough that we had. So last time it was just one battle, which we did over and over again, which was great fun. It gave us a real sense of how the combat works.
And if you click here now, you can hear Matt's impressions from that.
You can, yeah. It is floating above us as we speak. And this time we had 30 turns in the campaign map, so much sort of wider options. We were playing still as one specific faction, so we were playing as Liu Bei, who's sort of, I mean, it's maybe a simplification to say he's the good guy in this, but he is sort of one of the more heroic characters. And you obviously have his retinue with you as well. So we have 30 turns essentially to kind of meander through the campaign map and get a sense of how the game has changed, what's new. And there are obviously still battles and everything, so it's sort of a fully functioning build that contains all the sort of nuances and differences in this new game. Yeah,
so that must have been a very, very different experience then. Must have felt very different.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, I mean, like truthfully, the core experience is still very Total War, and you know, it's a campaign map. You kind of immediately have a sense of what you're doing and where you're going. But it's really good at sort of highlighting what has changed. So obviously, the big thing in this one is characters, and you're kind of getting a sense of these. It's almost like a buddy movie, but with spears. So these three guys, you've got Liu Bei and his retinue, who are sort of his oath-sworn brothers. And they kind of make up your army. So Liu Bei starts with the best army in the game. His sort of, you know, other factions have other skills, but he's sort of militarily is the most powerful faction.
Yeah.
So I mean, it helps that one of his retinue is a guy called Guan Yu, who is the guy who eventually becomes deified as the Chinese god of war. So he's kind of handy in a fight.
That's helpful. That's
it is. Yeah, I mean, you literally have the god of war on your side, which is, you know, I mean, and this plays into how the character stuff works. So like, you know, part of the game is managing how these guys get on, and luckily, you know, they get on pretty well. And that won't always be the case. It depends on sort of how you promote people and you know what happens on the battlefield, things like that. But also when you're actually on the battlefield, having a guy like that there means that when you're fighting enemy factions, you can just send him after their characters, and he'll, you know, encourage them to duel, and they foolishly accept, and he'll, you know, almost certainly kill them.
Just obliterate them.
Which again is an interesting thing if you're fighting against him, because obviously you will have to come up with a strategy for avoiding that guy, because he probably will kill you.
Can you elaborate? How does dueling work?
So essentially you're kind of calling out a person on the battlefield. So, you know, you're in the normal battle.
Mid-battle.
Exactly, yeah. So you'll kind of click on them, you'll have the option to duel them, you get a little bit of sort of flavour text saying, essentially, like the sort of ancient, you know, sort of feudal Chinese version of like, you know, come on then.
Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough.
Precisely. And it turns out most people aren't hard enough to go one-on-one with the literal god of war. So yeah, and they will kind of break off, and they will, you know, if you zoom up close, it's almost like a sort of wushu style fight with, you know, they'll charge each other, they'll dismount, they'll kind of, you know, have a proper kind of like a martial arts battle, and eventually one of them will die, and no one else can kind of get involved in that. And if you know, at any point you want to, if you think it's going badly, you can break off and run away. That will affect your sort of standing eventually, but you know, it's a very sort of nice cinematic moment. And I should stress as well, because I can sort of see your brow furrowing a little bit here, because this is not the Total War that you know and love.
I want numbers. Yeah, lots of numbers.
You can make it completely realistic. You can kind of remove this element. So there are two modes, beg your pardon. So there's the romance mode and the records mode. So the records mode is based on the actual text of the time, and the romance mode is based on the kind of dramatisation that followed in the 14th century. So
I'm very much the purist rather than the romantic.
You should try the romance mode, because it's really good fun. Like, and it does feel a lot different. But you know, you're still doing all the troops and stuff will still feel like Total War stuff. So you know, you're not going to win the battle with this guy on his own. But you know, it's just an extra thing to kind of, I don't want to say micromanage, because it's more exciting than that, but it's something else to think about when you're in the battle. Like, you know, if I'm in a disadvantageous situation, which I was during the playthrough, can I use this guy to try and sort of turn things around? Can I take out their generals and sort of break the spirit of their army, even though they've got sort of numerical superiority? It's fun.
Joking aside, I am genuinely looking forward to trying this. Like, I know I'm a bit of a purist when it comes to these games, but yeah, I want to be transported somewhere new and try something different.
It definitely feels like that. The whole art style is really sort of clean and fresh, and it looks great. They're using all sorts of new rendering techniques, which, you know, makes the whole thing look absolutely beautiful, which I presume we'll probably see in Warhammer 3 eventually as well. But you definitely get that sense of place that you want from a Total War game. And also because you love artillery, they have, you know, luckily they have that as well.
They're sort of known for gunpowder.
They kind of invented it, you know.
Yeah, that is handy. So you have these amazing characters within your faction, but you can actually release them into the wild, set them free.
You can.
My beauties.
I mean, there are a number of reasons that might potentially happen. Like sometimes characters fall out because the whole thing is underpinned with this system, like based on one chi, which is kind of the social network of the time. So that that people have friends and they have enemies, and eventually, they may fall out with you. They might not like what you're doing, and they may leave your faction. But also, if you want to, certain characters which have a little sort of eye next to their eye icon next to their character portraits can be released when you feel like it, and they can kind of be sent out into the wild. But they're still basically yours, so they're acting as spies. And then, if the skills are good enough, or if like there's a gap in another person's army, they'll get snapped up by the other faction, and then essentially the other faction will see them as a normal character, so they'll be ranking up normally within that faction. They may get positions of authority, so they may be put in charge of an army or a sort of a city, and then depending on where they are and what kind of character they are, like it will open up a load of options for you, each which there's sort of you have points that you can spend across the board, like with all of your spies, and then each individual spy has a rating as well, which and every action you take will spend some of those points depending on how complicated that action is, or how much it will make a difference to the sort of ultimate endgame. And this is kind of where it gets really interesting for me, because this really does change the game, and it kind of gives a much more characterful element to the way that the spies work. So previously, spies were kind of, you put them in enemy territory and you'd be able to see a bit more, and they kind of had quite sort of scripted actions. They didn't feel like people, whereas this to me really makes me feel like I've sent out someone that was sort of in my employ, and he's gone, and he's sort of on the other side of the not the world, but the country, kind of feeding information back to me, and he's in danger as well. So like every time he's taking an action, his sort of cover is diminishing. And if you want to, you can spend enough points to do really big stuff. So like one of the examples we saw, which I didn't actually do in my playthrough, but it's sort of a well-known one, is if he's in charge of a province, you can just hand that whole province over to back to your faction.
Oh wow! Okay.
So like which is amazing.
Just
so
flip it.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So you don't no military intervention at all. He just sort of says this province now belongs to Liu Bei, for example.
What if they prefer it with your enemy?
I mean,
can your enemy flip them?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. They can. Yeah. So like this kind of comes back to the sort of the management of how happy these people are. So like if he's amazingly loyal, he's having a great time, and he doesn't mind being in this sort of enemy province. Yeah. Then that's fine. He'll give you the city, but if he gets there and he actually likes it more, he'll stay there, and you'll be the one that will sort of lose out. The other option is that he may not like either faction, and he'll declare himself as a faction leader. But I mean, these sort of like wants and needs of all these characters underpin all these decisions. So there's one of the videos on the Creative Assembly website, and it shows how one spy kind of does this action. He hands over this city, but he doesn't escape. So he gets caught by the enemy faction, but then he gets released.
Suspicious.
Exactly. So the implication is that he can then be a double agent. So you'll be able to flip this guy and send him back to the person that had him in the first place. And if the next level of this is if a character gets sort of infiltrates the family tree of your enemy faction, then they get a whole different, like even more powerful selection of abilities they can eventually do, including like killing the faction leader and ascending to power themselves, and suddenly the whole faction can potentially come to you. And I think the most interesting and fun bit about all of this is that this works in multiplayer as well.
Oh wow, right, okay.
So you and I can be playing, you can sweep up one of my characters that I've who's left because I'm a terrible employer, just like real life, and the entire time he could be feeding me information about your campaign.
I'm never going to take any of your characters.
Of course not. Yeah, I mean this is the problem, isn't it? Yeah. I really want to.
Come on then, come a little bit closer. Yeah, a little bit closer.
Look how good he is.
This nice ravine. Just walk through there.
I mean, like. The kind of complete decay of trust that we'll have playing this game is amazing. But that's the other element of it. It does work both ways. So you're looking at your own character list, thinking, are you loyal? Because at any time they could be controlled by an AI faction.
Can you assassinate people in your retinue who you might be suspicious of?
That I don't know. Well, you can just get rid of them, so you can dismiss them and then
just send them back.
Yeah. But I'm not sure about. I'm sure you probably can, because it feels like it's such a sort of nuanced, complicated system that there are loads of options. I expect.
I mean, this all sounds like the kind of thing I think some purists, not myself, I hasten to add, might find would detract from the Total War experience. But it sounds like this is really enriching it and builds you like you value your units and you value your loyal subjects more than you would otherwise do.
Totally,
They're
yeah.
more than just a number, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it does depend how you play Total War, but I think I've always played it in kind of almost an RPG sort of way, where you have your generals and your spies, and they've got names and they've got traits, and you feel like these units are more than just units; they're people, and you kind of you learn to sort of love them and their kind of idiosyncrasies and the experiences they've had. And this kind of just cements that in some ways. It kind of. Instead of it just being stats on a screen, they've done stuff and they've been places, and if you do get a spy back who's helped you, take a city. And you send him out elsewhere, you're like, that guy's the guy for the job. He's he knows what he's doing. It also adds a kind of Game of Thrones style level of colour to the proceedings, which is pretty cool.
Hey, fantastic. Okay, so much for subterfuge. What about coalitions and diplomacy, Matt?
So again, that's slightly changed. It's still recognisable from what Total War used to be, but you now have coalitions. So your kind of first steps to working with another faction usually take shape as a coalition. So people will approach you and say, do you want to be in a coalition? And you can say yes or no. And to start with, it doesn't really feel like there's any reason not to do it. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be friends, because I was in a coalition with a couple of factions that didn't particularly like me. They just recognised that it was sensible to do so. It kind of opens up options for things like trade deals, military access, alliances and stuff. So that whole, the idea of getting into a military alliance feels like quite a big deal, so you have to kind of edge your way towards it. But it does open up some kind of interesting anecdotal stuff. So there was a nice old man who lived next door to me, had like a smallish faction. I entered into a coalition with him. He died and then left me all his land. So I essentially annexed a whole territory just because I was friends with this old man, a bit like an elderly neighbour leaving you his lawnmower when he dies.
Exactly like
that, but a bit more war-y,
a bit more feudal.
And this kind of ties into the way the endgame works. So eventually one faction will declare themselves emperor, and then the second and third most powerful factions will kind of also declare themselves emperor, and all of their kind of people who are in coalitions with them and alliances and stuff will join together, and you'll have three huge factions all vying for control of China, which is a potentially really fun endgame.
How many turns do you think it will take to get to that? Because you played 30 turns on this.
Yeah, 30 turns felt like nothing.
Yeah, really, barely scratched the surface.
I guess your traditional Total War endgame kind of comes. For me, it usually comes sort of, as you're scraping 100 turns, but some Total War games don't really end.
No, well,
that's kind of what I found with Total Warhammer, is that's kind of when things are wrapping up. But I think traditionally this is maybe a problem the series has had. It's like that hard cut-off at the end where you really feel like you've achieved what you set out to achieve. So I think by kind of forcing it in a way that feels historically accurate, it could make for a really nice conclusion.
Amazing. So come on, Matt, when is Total War Three Kingdoms actually out?
It's out on the 7th of March, and I will be sending you perfectly good people to add to your retinue. Not spies.
Not spies.
Around the 8th of March.
Not spies.
I think.
I'm just going to kill endless waves of people trying to defect. It's going to be awful. It's going to be horrible. You should tune into the channel to have a look, see how it goes. Thank you very much, Matt. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and you'll get loads more Total War stuff in your inbox very soon. And also in the comments below, we'd like you to tell us which is your favourite Total War game of all time. For me, it has to be Napoleon. Matt?
Medieval 2, because I'm a purist, which is another way of saying that I'm boring and old.
That is true, you are boring and old. But you lovely viewers are not boring or old. Well, you might be, but you're still brilliant. So please let us know.